Let's get
You have
started.
no
Yeah,
idea.
we are live from somebody's studio. All right. Yeah, to answer your questions, for many, verbs can be more difficult or more complex. And let's consider this for a moment. So there is a greater degree of flexibility is probably not the right word, but uh, variability is a better word, associated with verbs than we have with English. Verbs do much more in Greek than they do in English. And so, because we are accustomed to our English usage of verbs and how they're formed and how they function, we go to the Greek, we see they have a much greater variability and flexibility. And that's significant because it's the verbs that really gives us information about the action of that the subject is doing, or the action that the subject is receiving, or some combination of that. And and so, as we look into, like Galatians 4:4 says, in the fullness of time, God sent forth His Son, and under the law, and so when all things were ready, well, the language is part of that, because the Greek language gives us more in-depth understanding about some of the aspects of what's going on. And that's really where the Greek strength comes from, is in the verb. So our greatest understanding of some of the aspects and actions in the text is associated with the verb. However, it is difficult for us in English because we can't always express the same aspects or same actions in a way. And for example, that leads us exactly, if we go to our chapters in chapter 15, I don't know if I'm going to get all the way through 15 and 16 today. And that's okay. I gave us an extra week because I wanted to take our time. Now, I'm going to ask you not to take notes. All right. I just want you to listen, especially for this first few parts, because this is going to be overwhelming. I promise you, this is overwhelming. And I don't intend for you to absorb it all in this class, because this is just the big picture. And we're going to kind of look at the big picture and then start to break it down in its pieces as we move forward. And when we start to break it down into pieces, then you're going to need to. So you need to see the big picture of what we're doing, where we're going, what the book is trying to do and bring out. And then as we sort of examine the pieces, it will start to sort of fill in the puzzle and begin to make sense. But it's going to take a little while. Remember, the book talks about how when you come to something new, it's going to be kind of fuzzy. You're like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure I really grasp it yet. Well, that's normal. And normally after a little bit of time, you get more comfortable with what was done 2 or 3 weeks ago. A little more comfortable with it anyway. But then what's being added is a little more fuzzy. So that's just the process. It's a process of learning. So one good thing is chapter 15 is an introduction to verbs. 16 really deals with our first Greek verb, the present active indicative. We'll talk about that. I may or may not be able to get through 16, and I'm okay with that. I don't want to rush it. But then we have chapter 17, which is sort of like so I kind of like the way they structured this, sort of like a intermission per se, because we're going to talk about contract verbs. Well, that's sort of a different animal. Doesn't really, it kind of gives us more information about how vowels contract and stuff like this. But it gives us time to absorb, is my point, these new elements that we're not as comfortable with on this present active indicative in the verb structure. Okay, so if that makes sense, guys. So just don't worry about trying to understand everything at this point. This point is really just a big picture overview. And I want to start with in page 149, an article done by Dr. Craig Keener, and he focuses on Matthew 18, verse 18, and to just sort of highlight how a verb can be really different. And to do that, what I want to do, let's see if I can do this. I want to go to Let's do it this way. All right, let's see if I can go to Matthew. Let's have a glare on my screen here. Matthew 18. Oh, by the way, the same thing we're going to talk about in Matthew 18, I think it's verse 18. Yeah, it is verse 18. Is actually the exact same thing in Matthew 16, verse 19. That's critical. Do you remember what Matthew 16, verse 19 says? You preachers surely know this.
Yeah, Sam definitely does.
Yeah, Sam? You put him on the spot. That's so mean. Man, what a friend. Remember Matthew 16 there, Jesus started to the
I'll
disciples.
build my church.
Who do you say I am?
Listen,
I am?
I can quote it.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go.
I will give you the keys of the kingdom.
Yeah, keep going though. That's not the point that we're going to
And
talk.
whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven.
Look, it looks like he's reading. He's not quoting it.
Yeah, it does look that way, doesn't it? But hey, I'm not the judge. We'll let God judge us.
I had to read it too.
And the watching audience, we'll let the audience judge this, and we can all be judgmental to Samuel in his time of need. Loving Christians, everyone is. Thank you so much. All right, so let's read context here first, and so that I can do all the speaking. One of you read Matthew 18 verses 15 through 24, so we have context.
You said Matthew 18, 15 through 20?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me okay? Do I need to repeat
Yeah.
it?
I just wanted to make sure.
Say it louder. What do I need to do?
No, you're good.
Okay.
All right. Great. If your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. But if he does not listen to you, take one or two more with you, so that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every fact may be confirmed. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth, you shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you that if 2 of you agree on earth about anything that they may ask, it shall be done for them by my Father who is in heaven. For where 2 or 3 have gathered together in my name, I am there in their midst.
Okay, so thank you very much, Samuel. So Samuel did all the hard work. Jake, would you kind of give us a quick overview of what the context is referring to?
All right, here in Matthew, see, I'm over in Matthew 16, 18, not Matthew 18, 16. All right, let me get back over there. Okay.
Well, all right. Now the audience is really going to judge you.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's in red letters, so Jesus is speaking. It's quite intuitive of me to.
Yeah, it's red. That makes it definitive. Yeah.
Yeah. So Matthew 18 is one of those staple chapters to go to whenever there is kind of an issue in the church. If there's somebody that you see that sinned, you follow that Matthew 18 guideline. You go to that person, and then you bring 2 or 3 to him, and then you go to the church, and then you, anyways. And so that's a part of what Jesus is speaking of here. Whenever you have the 2 or 3 now, sorry, my exegetical mind's going everywhere here.
You're fine. Listen. I just want a general, because I don't want to put anyone on the spot here, because that's what we're going to talk about, specifically verse 18. And listen, if you're on page 149 of our book of William Mouse's Basic of Biblical Greek, he brings Greg Kinnear, Dr. Kinnear brings this out. And I kind of want to touch on some things he brings out, but I want to expand upon it. But before we do that, so you're reading from Samuel, the New American Standard Bible, I'm pretty sure. Were you reading what I had online? You have your own.
I have my own. I got logos up.
Okay, all right. So New American Standard Bible. I want us to take a look for a moment at some of the other translations associated with this passage here. Specifically, we're going to look at verse 18. Matthew, it'd help if I stayed in English, wouldn't it? What do you think, guys? Matthew 18.18. Okay. Yeah, probably didn't look in Greek, there's a Greek at that time. So I'm in English, MATT 18.18. Go. All right. Should be coming up. There we go. All right. So you read the New American Standard Bible. The focus here is truly, I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. This has been a debated question. Does this mean, well, actually, if you read some of the other verses first, ESV, truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Well, notice the difference between the New American Standard Bible that I got a glare on my iPad, my tablet here. Okay, so whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. ESV, though, says whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. It emphasizes a future event, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. King James does the same thing. Whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you loose on earth shall also, does say also, shall be loosed in heaven. NIV, pretty much the same thing, will be bound in heaven, will be loosed in heaven. The New Living Translation will be forbidden because binding, what does binding mean? Who wants to be the scholar to say bind? What is binding referred to?
Like chains being held.
Okay,
I mean,
yeah, or forbidden, right?
Okay.
Right, and then whatever you permit, loose, to untie, to permit. You're right. Binding, and we're going to look at this in a minute, is more to sort of tie up or to forbid, right? So, like Satan is bound for 1,000 years, right? So he is forbidden in a spiritual sense in this 1,000-year period. Revelation 20, verse 3, I believe it is. Maybe it's 2, but I think it's verse 3. He is bound for 1,000 years. Well, that's really because he no longer has the power of death. The gospel is available for all mankind, and he is not able to overcome the power of death or the power of the gospel. And so he works to deceive us. So anyway, the binding is sort of forbidding, where the loosing is to permit. The NCV, and I forget what NCV stands for. Let me see what it tells me. New Century Bible. That's what that is. Okay. So get back to where I was. I don't want to be there. So the New Century Bible will say I tell you the truth, things you don't allow on earth will be the things God does not allow. And the same thing with on heaven, right? The Good Word Bible, whatever you imprison, God will imprison. Whatever you set free, God sets free. Home Christian Standard Bible, whatever you bind on earth is already bound in heaven. So there's a difference here. Now, notice the real difference. Most of the Bibles are translating this as that whatever the disciples do on earth, God will validate, God will do in heaven, a future event, right? And so it's as if the disciples have this authority and this power that God is affirming, or even following. It almost implies that anyway. However, when you look at like the Home Christian Standard Bible, which actually is dated because now it's just the Christian Standard Bible, that although I don't know what it says, notice the King James, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Same with loosing in heaven, and on down the line. But you see some, especially the New American Standard Bible, really does a different translation. That whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven. Well, that's not the same thing as will be bound or will be loose, kind of thing. So what's the difference here? All right. So that's where the Greek kind of helps. And when we look at, let me pull up something else that I think I can find. That's not what I want. Don't want that. Go away. Let's see. Okay, this is what I want right here. So let's take this verse. And I'm going to look at the New American Standard Bible. We could look at any of them, it doesn't matter. But we'll look at the Greek behind the English, all right? So truly I say to you, whatever you bind. Let's stop with bind. So the word is from the root deo, meaning, and I don't know if I can write on this or not. Yeah, I can. Let me do it this way. Well, I don't do text. Really, I just want to highlight. I don't know if I can highlight it. No. All right, top left corner. Oh, can you see that? Let me blow this up. Let's do it this way. Okay, top left corner. That helps, right? So the word bind from its original language comes from the root deo, and it means really to oblige or bind, right? We can look up more detail about the meaning of that, but it's to bind, to tie, to fetter, like a chain, one's chained to a fetter, or fetter to a chain. And here the verb is actually an aorist active subjunctive. Okay, it's not a big deal. I'm not going to go into that. But so whatever you bind, notice the root is deo, and then shall have been bound. Shall have been bound also has the same root, deo. So it's really referring to the same thing, to bind, tie, fetter. But now the verb is a perfect passive participle plural nominative neuter. There's a lot in here, and what I want you to see that it's a perfect passive participle. Let me just highlight this much. A participle is a form of a verb, but it has a noun characteristics in addition to verb characteristics. So it has both verbal and noun or adjective characteristics. We have participles in English, right? What do we normally do? We add ing to it. I was studying. Well, that's a participle. We also have in English a gerund. Studying is my hobby. Well, if the ing form functions as the subject, it's a gerund. And if it's functioning as something else, it's a participle. In Greek, we don't have gerunds. We just have participles. So a participle is never the main verb. So this other form of deo, to bind, is in a participle, and it's not the main verb, but it has a perfect tense and it's passive. We're going to get into that in a moment. But here's the key. Here's why the translations differ. Okay, so here's why they differ. If you look at, I don't know if I can get this whole thing on this page. I'm going to try to. This right here. Okay, shall. The word shall, that's used twice, right, in the New American Standard, or other translations says will be, shall be, whatever. What the Greek says is that it uses that form of ami, which we have learned already. You already know ami, right? It's a verb. And ami, it's using the form that's a future tense form. It's a middle voice we're not going to get into in the indicative third person singular. So basically says it will be. And so most translations really emphasize this future form. However, they don't emphasize as much the participle form. And that's because the main verb is shall be, will be. That's the main verb. The participle, though, is modifying that verb. So what the New American Standard does is they put an emphasis on the participles and the verb combination, called a periphrastic construction. They put the emphasis on the combination. Will be is the main verb, but the participle is a perfect passive. So it's have been bound. So will be, have been bound, or shall have been bound. They put the emphasis on the participle, well, really the meaning behind this. It's the same thing with shall have been loosed. To loose, oh, don't do that. Okay. So the word loose, luo, which is actually that's going to be our go word and verbs to study from. Luo is its root. Notice the root down here. Luo. I'm pointing like you can see what I'm pointing. I want to underline it, but if I do, everything moves around. And this, just an aorist active subjunctive verb, which doesn't really matter. but the root form is luo, and it's a aorist, big picture kind of thing that you might loose. And notice that have been loosed is from the same root, luo. It means the same thing: to unbind, to unfast, to loosen, to untie, to release. And so it's formed, though, in this case, same verb, but used now in a perfect passive participle, just like the de-o is up here in dead dedimina. And here it's now lelumina. And they're both a perfect passive. And so in both cases, the New American Standard tries to bring out the meaning of both the participle and its relationship to the main verb. So that's why they say it shall have been bound or shall have been loosed. And that's why you see not 26. Why is it doing 26? 18. Okay, so all right, and that's why you see the Home and Christian Standard Bible here also puts an emphasis. Oh, that's wrong.
You're in verse 8.
Oh, why am I in verse 8? What happened here? Wake up.
There you go.
There we go. All right, so that's why we get in the Home and Christian Standard Bible also tries to bring is already bound in heaven. So the emphasis is what they're trying to bring out to show that, hey, God is not just doing what you want, right? Where the other translation sort of gives the implication that whatever you do on earth, God will do in heaven. Well, that's not really accurate. The accuracy is that whatever you do on earth, whatever you forbid on earth, it has already been bound in heaven. And God, it's an agreement with. And then if you look at the end of page 149, the end of the article, Dr. Craig Keener's article, says, but just as we struggle to affirm absolutes in a relative culture, Christians today sometimes wonder how to exercise discipline lovingly against a sinning member of the church. In this text, Jesus provides an answer. When the person refuses to turn from sin after repeated and loving confrontation, the church, by disciplining the person, simply recognizes the spiritual reality that's already true in God's sight. And that's what this participle and main verb combination, perspective construction, tries to bring out. So it's not something that has that you do on earth that God's going to agree with, God's going to do. It's something that is already forbidden or permitted by God, and we're in alignment with. And so when we are, the context here is when someone is outside of the graces of God, outside the right relationships with God, a Christian who's fallen away in some sin, living in their sin, we're to go to them, privately, and then with two or more, and then publicly. That is publicly within the church, not publicly outside of the church. That's wrong. Publicly within the church, you don't bring church problems to the world, but publicly within the church, you try to get the church. Why? Because you want them to come to their senses and realization of what they're giving up. And so the point here is that they have already left God. And all you're doing is trying to highlight that reality. So whatever we do on earth is associated with what God has already done in heaven. And so I like how he words it down here. We're simply recognize the spiritual reality that's true in God's sight. And that's the difference here. So when you look at the King James, New King James, the ESV, they don't really bring that out because it's difficult to bring out. It doesn't even read easily. I mean, how easy is it to read and really grasp? Whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall have been loosed in heaven. First off, binding, you're thinking, well, binding, I guess that's tying up. Whatever you tie up on earth shall have already been tied up in heaven. I don't know what that is. Whatever you loose on earth, what do you mean loose? So we're already in this complex understanding by using words that are not as clear. So binding is whatever you refuse, or not refuse, but don't allow. Well, you're just in agreement with God because God doesn't allow it. And whatever you release or untie, well, you're just in agreement with God because God has. You're just doing God's will. In other words, you're just bringing the recognition of God's will to that person. And so the context shows us that we're trying to help them to see the Word of God, the will of God. Does that make sense? You see what's happening here? That's why I wanted to highlight verbs in this aspect because it really brings out, one, the difficulty with some translation. Participles are not easy to translate in a lot of cases. And so there's a lot of variation sometimes. And we see that here. Not that anyone has a problem translating the main verb, the ame verb. It will be, it's future. Nobody has a problem with that per se. But the participle in this case is modifying that verb. Now, sometimes the participle modifies an adjective or functions as an adjective or a noun or something like that. But in this case, it is modifying the verb, and that makes it more complex. And so when you talk about the complexity and the depth, I mean, this is the kind of thing we're studying, we're looking at. Does that help? That makes sense, guys? You see what we're doing?
Yes, sir.
So the exact same thing is in Matthew 16, verse 19, right? It's the exact same thing. So if we go there, let me just do that because I didn't look at it really in advance. Matthew 16:19. Okay, so I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall have been bound in heaven. So the New American Standard Bible is very consistent in its translation. It's the exact same word, by the way. I wanted to bring that out. Exact same. You have the same verb, will be, main verb, and then you have the same participle from deo. So it's the exact same thing there. And the ESV said, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Again, they do. They put the emphasis on the main verb and not as much on the participle. It's there by the word loosed or the word bound in a completed past tense form. The King James, whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Again, bound being sort of a past tense. So they try to bring it out in that sense. It's not, maybe it's an easier read, but it's not as clear that it's something that God has already authorized, kind of thing. So anyway, maybe I went too far, but it was interesting to me, and I wanted to do a little work and bring that out to just see why this matters. That help or confusion?
I get where it's going. That how some of the words it's easy to translate, like Amy or these words, but then you get into, okay, well, how do we translate that part of it? These
Yeah.
especially when it comes to like English, because there's a lot of things like you were saying that Greek can say, but it's hard to put into English kind of words.
Yeah, English doesn't carry the same. We're going to look at that today, next here. English doesn't carry the same degree of capability of verbs.
I think I've heard Dan Winkler in one of his talks say, when, he always goes into Greek and stuff like that, but he says, in the English, we don't have like the proper way to really say what the Greek is saying here.
Yeah, there's a lot of cases where we can translate, obviously, into the English. We might have to use more words, where in the Greek you might use one word to express an action and the type of action and who's doing the action. But in English, we might have to use, 2, 3, 4, 5 words to express the same thing for a lot of different reasons. And then there's some degrees of complexity that, these scholars, the King James scholars, the New King James scholars, the ESV scholars, they understand all this. The question is how to put it in English that the English reader can understand it. And so we see that the Holman Christian Standard Bible and the New American Standard Bible takes a different tact or different approach in how they try to bring out what the actual meaning is. The King James, the New King James, ESV try to do the same thing, but it's not as clear in my mind that their approach brings out an action that God has already an agreement that God has already put in place, and we're just highlighting that agreement. And that's what the apostles were doing in Matthew 18 as well as in Matthew 16. When Jesus asked the apostles, the disciples, whom do people say I am? They answered this and that. But who do you say I am? Peter stands up. You are the Son of God. And I wish I had your recall. I could quote it because you quote just as good as you read, so that's pretty impressive.
Right.
And
they're both poor.
yeah. And but then he goes on to show that whatever is bound on earth shall be bound in heaven, but it's have already been bound in heaven.
So that's why they put like the shall have in there to try to emphasize
Right.
what it's emphasizing.
Well, all these little helping verbs, have, for example, they all make a difference in terms of our understanding. And that's what we're going to kind of get into today, both in English.
Okay.
So this is an overview. This is not like, oh, wow, now I understand it all. This is like, okay, this is what is really the big picture. And you will not grasp all of it. Well, you might. You might be a genius. I won't grasp all of it. Put it that way. Let's talk about a few things. So when we're talking about English, for example, verbs describe an action or state of being. Now, you already know that, right? I love Greek. Is that an action or a state of being? The verb is love. Is that an action or a state of being? I'm putting you on the spot. The whole world is watching because we have like millions of viewers, and they're going to go like, man, that guy really got it right.
It's a state of being.
Okay, I love is an action. I love Greek, right? You were still talking about the subject is doing something. He's loving Greek. I'm going to get to state of being next. I am studying Greek now. I love as a concept and not a tangible. So that's probably why we want to do that. But it's really an action. I love Greek. Or is it a state of being? I'll have to double check that. So maybe all the millions of viewers will correct me. Okay, but clearly I am studying Greek is an action, right? The subject is doing the action. Well, I love, the subject is loving. What are they doing? They're loving Greek. But now Greek is the heavenly language. There is no action. It's a state of being. And so verbs will function either where the subject is doing the action or the subject is receiving the action or some sort of state of being, a relationship between the subject and what's referred to as the predicate nominative. That is some qualitative relationship between another noun. All right, so verbs can also express time, right? We're familiar, past, present, or future. The actions can be, now this is where it gets a little complicated, okay? Because now we get linguistically. So verbs can really, in English, be what's referred to as not imperfected, dummy. It's incorrect. It's imperfective. It's not perfect. It's imperfective. There we go. Okay. So imperfective just really means, okay, it really means nothing more than some kind of continuous or ongoing action or some habitual action. So in English, we would say, I am studying Greek. Well, or something that's ongoing. Or I study Greek. Well, that kind of gives you the implication that something that's ongoing or habitual. Maybe I don't study it continuously, but maybe I study it every, Tuesday and Friday morning, kind of thing. Then you have the perfective, or often referred to as undefined, or completed is another way. Let me add that here. Completed. Completed. So a completed kind of action. I studied Greek. Well, that's something you did, but it doesn't give an indication that you're still doing it. I have studied Greek. Well, here's where this have are helping verbs that we use in English. I have studied Greek. Not only says that I did it in the past, but there's an ongoing result of what I did. I have studied implies that, well, now I know something about Greek. So I did something in the past that has an ongoing effect. So would be I have studied Greek, but it's a completed action. So in English, verbs can typically be what's referred to as imperfective or perfective. A better way to say that's how linguistics use these terms, imperfective and perfective. A better way would be more a continuous or undefined or completed and there's a reason for that, because later on we're going to see we have an imperfect tense and a perfect tense, and it gets all confused and you're like, oh, my head. So just know in English we have verbs. The kind of action can be something that's ongoing, iterative, habitual, or something that's completed with sort of a big picture. Hey, I completed something. It doesn't tell you anything more than that. Or I completed something, and as a result of completing it, there's some impact. So when we look at English grammar, time is also a major factor in the verb, past, present, or future. I mean, really, English verbs are strong in its function of either being past, present, or future. Also, tense. Now, in English, we have tense is both a combination of time and form, right? Time, past, present, or future. And form being what it looks like, okay? I have studied. Well, that form is different from I studied. Okay, they're both past. They're both time in the past, but there's a difference between a form of I studied and I have studied. So the form is really sort of the structure. It's how it looks, and it gives us more information about it. Time from a standpoint, though, is always from the speaker, not from the hearer. So when the text in English or in Greek is talking about time, then ultimately it's from the speaker's perspective, not from ours. We talk grammar in English is also what's referred to as aspect. Now, we don't generally think about aspect. It's not something. Time is, hey, past, present, or future. You don't have a problem with that. We don't generally think about, though, aspect. Aspect is not the time of action or even the form, but the kind of action. Is it completed action? Is it continuous action? Is it particular, like one point in time? Is it iterative? All kinds of different ways to express that. So you have tense, which is going to be a relationship between time and its form. The form is going to reflect the time, right? The structure, the way it looks, is going to reflect the time, past, present, or future. But then the aspect is a kind of action. Is it ongoing? Is it completed? Is it particular? Like it's just hey, here's the picture. And then we have voice, active and passive. The subject did the action, that's active. Subject receives the action, that's passive. You already know that. And we have mood. Now, that's not a mood ring that you wear that tells you how you're feeling. But mood is a relationship of the verb to what would be referred to the reality of the speaker. So if the speaker is talking, and from that speaker's perspective, he's stating a fact, it may or may not be true, he's stating a fact, that would be in the indicative mood, because that mood reflects factual information. In English, it expresses a fact or a statement. We also have a mood in English that reflects as the imperative. What's an imperative? We already know that. It's a command or a decree, right? We have a mood in English that expresses the interrogative. That is, you already know what interrogative is. It's a question, and normally sort of the uncertainty about, So, for example, in indicative, like you say, Jake loves Greek. Okay, so there's a fact. It may or may not be true, but it's in the indicative mood. It states a fact or a statement. Jake loves Greek. But in the imperative, it would be, Jake, you will love Greek. Well, that's an imperative, right? It's a command or a decree. But interrogative might be a less uncertain, more uncertainty. Does Jake love Greek? But then you have conditional, right? A different kind of mood here. Not a mood ring, but a mood. For example, if Jake loves Greek, then Sam's going to love it too. And then a subjunctive. A subjunctive is going to be more Well, the text says a desire, a doubt, or hypothetical, for example, would be I think Jake loves Greek, or well, I sure hope Jake loves Greek. So you see, in English, we have not just the tense, but we also have a mood. The tense will also give us an idea of the kind of action and the voice who's doing the action or receiving the action. The relationship of that verb, its action or state of being, to what reality is from the speaker's perspective. Does any of that make sense, or did I throw you all a curveball?
No, it makes sense.
Okay, we already have this in English. We just don't think about it at all. So we have to learn a little English grammar to go back through it. Let me talk about aspect. So in English, we have what's called perfective, or aspect gives us the most trouble. It gives everyone, myself included, the most trouble. Perfective really refers to something that is completed, generally. I studied last night. Well, okay, it's a completed action. I know the time, it's past last night. But it doesn't tell me anything about the action at all, except that it was done. I studied last night. I don't know if you study for hours, you study for continuously, or a particular one point in time, or if there's a result of your study. In other words, I studied last night, but I didn't get a thing out. We don't know any of that, right? So what we see is that generally it's a past, completed, or kind of action, or simple kind of action. The imperfective would be more of a continuous, ongoing kind of action. I was studying last night. Well, we again have the past. Now we have to use the helping word was, the past, but studying, this really participle form, ing, says it's ongoing to some degree. And it was done in time, again, last night. So we have both last night and was, kind of tells the time. So it's an incomplete action, in other words. It's not done. I was studying last night. Oh, did you finish? It doesn't say that, right? There's no implication. It just what occurred, and it was an ongoing effect, an ongoing event. Excuse me, not effect. So it was an incomplete action, and oftentimes we got to have a lot of helping forms to express that I was studying last night. Does that make sense? Okay, aspect can be our most difficult thing to really deal with, and so push that. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. All right. So another view of aspect. So we can have a completed, or what we would call perfective, right? Or what linguistics call perfective, a completed kind of action. It could be in the present. It could be in the past. It could be in the future, right? I study. Well, that's something I do in the present. It doesn't tell me anything about the studying. It doesn't even say it's ongoing. It just says I study. Well, okay. Well, thanks for letting me know. Or it could be in the past. I studied. Well, it's a completed action. I don't know anything more than it occurred in the past. Or I will study. Again, it's a promise that you probably won't keep. I'm being sarcastic, obviously. I will study. Excuse me, I got going off here. But obviously, it's in the future. So we're talking about a completed kind of action, which was referred to by linguistics as perfective. But time is relatable, or it can be done, completed action in the present, past, or future. Or we can have what's referred to as the imperfective aspect, which would be like a continuous kind of action. Now, there's all kinds of ways to continue an action, right? I can do it iteratively. I can do it continuously. So we're just going to broadly say continuously. So some kind of continuous, ongoing kind of action. I am studying. Well, that's in the present. I am studying. I'm doing it now, and it's ongoing. In the past, I was studying. It's ongoing kind of thing, but it was in the past. Doesn't mean I'm doing it now. But I did it in some ongoing or interactive, or not interactive, iterative, or kind of way in the past. Or in the future, I will be studying. So there's an indication that when I do something in the future, I will do it continuously in some form. So aspect kind of gives us more information about the kind of action that's occurring. Does that make sense? All right, so I want to bring out a little bit now about Greek and grammar difference in English, all right? In English, we talked about tenses. and I mentioned several, which the book only mentions, I think, I pulled up some others. The book, I think, only mentions 2 tenses, if I remember right. And of course, the tense refers to both a relationship between time and form, right? And so it has the present tense, the future tense, and the past tense are the only ones they bring up. But there are several others in English, and I put those in the slide just for reference. In tense in Greek doesn't necessarily refer to time in the same way English does. Now, tense doesn't in itself have a relationship with time, but associated with its mood will help apply a time or may not. Tense refers only to the form of the verb, right? Remember in English we had time and form, right? Time, past, present, or future. But the form is I study, I am studying, or I was studying, and I will be studying, right? So tense has both form, I study, I will study, I am studying, forms, and time relationship in English. Greek tense is only about the form. It's only about what it looks like. And now there's more to that, but it's only about its form, right? In relationship to English. Now, aspect is also a little different in between English and Greek. In Greek, we have an imperfective, just like we do in English, right? It's sort of continuous or ongoing kind of action. I don't like to use the word imperfective once I get to Greek because there's a tense called the imperfect, and I don't like to use the perfective because there's a tense called the perfect. And I don't want to mix up tense and aspect. It becomes too confusing to separate in my simple mind here. But ultimately, what we see is that the aspect in Greek has both an imperfective and a perfective form. That is the same as English, continuous or ongoing for the imperfective. And we'll generally call it continuous, and perfective being completed. And we'll refer to it generally as completed. But perfective has a lasting effect. So it's not just something that's completed, but there's some lasting effect, whether that lasting effect's in the past or lasting effect in the future, depends. But we also have in Greek what's referred to as the undefined or simple. And that would be what the aorist tense. So when we look at the little table here, so we have in English a perfective and an imperfective aspect. In Greek, we have perfective and imperfective and the aorist aspect. In English, these perfective and imperfective are expressed using auxiliary verbs plus various verb forms. So I was helping, I am, I will be, that kind of stuff. But in Greek, that is intrinsically within the verb form. It's all embedded in the verb itself. You don't need helping verbs. Now, we got to do helping verbs to make it understandable in English, but the Greek didn't do that. It's in the verb. So it's a lot more capability expressed in the verb form itself without a lot of other helping verbs. And also, when you talk about the tense, in English, tense is dependent a lot on, it's tense dependent with time, but there's less dependency in Greek in terms of its tense depending upon time. So there is some differences here, and also there's a difference in voice. In English, we have active and passive, but in Greek, we have active and passive the same. Subject does the action. Passive, the subject receives the action. But we also have middle voice, and that is the subject not only does the action, but receives some result of the action that he did. So it kind of kicks back on him. We're going to go into that more. So there's some differences, and those are the really highlighted differences. So if you know your English, these are the changes we're kind of focusing on. Let's talk about what a verb looks like, its form, right? Remember when we did nouns, we looked at, it's case, number, and gender, and we had, the cases were nominative, the dative, accusative, as well as vocative. And the case endings would tell us about how the noun is functioning in its sentence. Well, for verbs, we have something similar, Now we'll have a root and we'll have a stem. All right, we saw that. And then we have various case endings. Well, in verbs, we have something similar, but it's not the same. We have a tense stem, and you'll see why it's called a tense stem later, such as lu. Lu means it's tense. It's from the root, happens to be the same. The root is the same as the tense stem, lu, meaning to loose. All right, and we add a connecting vowel. It's either going to be the omicron or the epsilon, one of the two. And then we add the personal endings, like men, lua men. Well, lua men gives me information about the verb that's being used, if it's first person, second person, or third person, if it's singular or plural, and the ongoing kind of action or aspect of it. Now, let me mention just root. You already know this, but I'm going to mention it here. The root, for example, the root agap, to love, right? It's the most basic form, and it carries its most basic meaning. Agap is to love. When I put its personal ending, agapao, then it's a verb saying I love. So embedded in the verb form is the subject, I, and the one doing the loving. Or the same root, agap, can have a noun function, agape, and means to love. He loves, she loves, they love, whatever. Or in the adjectival form, it can be agapetos. So it's still the same root, agap, and agapetos now is an adjectival, meaning beloved. And so our root carries the basic form of the meaning. And then for a verb form, we're going to add a tense stem, a connecting vowel, and a personal ending. That is all we're doing in terms of the form. Okay, that makes sense. Are you guys seeing what we're talking about here?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, in terms of how a verb functions, I like to see the hand of God coming down from heaven. Okay, that's not real. But we see 5 functions of a New Testament Greek verb, a biblical Greek verb. And that is number, person, tense, voice, and mood. Not necessarily in that order. Number you're already familiar with. You did that in nouns. So you're not learning anything new. It's either singular or plural. That's it. Person, well, okay, you didn't do that in nouns because they don't have a person. But you already know person, first person, second person, third person. First person is I in a singular form, we in a plural form. Second person in English is you, singular, and you in the plural, or y'all, however you want to say it southernly. And third person would be, we do have third person in verbs, he, she, or it, right? Or excuse me, they in the plural, or he, she, or it in the singular. And then we're going to add these other 3 that are probably, you maybe have some knowledge of, but you probably don't really think about it. That's tense. Now, voice, you already know. You already know active voice, the subject's doing the action. You already know passive voice, the subject's receiving the action. We're adding a middle, which is not, sometimes a little hard to recognize, and it's debatable whether it's really middle or passive. That's context, and that's sort of something that takes some time to sort of understand. But basically, you have in English we have active and passive, but in Greek we add a middle to that. And then mood. Now, English has moods. We're going to look at moods and how they function in Greek. They are different in Greek than they are in English. So let's sort of put the pieces together. Talk about person and number in Greek. So verbs, like nouns, are singular or plural. I already mentioned that. Verbs agree with their subject. Typically, there are exceptions, and normally those exceptions have a reason. Like English, like Greek, 3 persons. Like I mentioned, first person, second person, third person. Right? I, singular, we, plural, you, singular and plural. Third person, he, she, it, or singular or they. So what happens is in the Greek we have our root and our stem. I'm not going to focus on the root here, but the stem aku, and we add, instead of a case ending like we did in nouns, now we add personal endings. Well, the personal endings tell us things that a case doesn't apply. Cases for nouns or adjectives, but for verbs we need a personal endings because it's going to tell us if it's first person, second person, or third person, or singular or plural. They'll give us all that information. So aku plus the you want to write? Where's my right? I don't see it. I'm gonna do this. I guess it's not my favorite way to do it. Let me try this. See if it lets me. So aku, if I take this omega here and I go akuo, that is the word akuo refers to hear. I hear. If I then take this aku ace, now I may not get all the spelling because there are some spelling changes that occur with some of these vowels. Remember we talked about ablaut, how things lengthen and how things sometimes change. So aku ace now is the second person singular. You, Jake, here. And if we were to change that and make it akue, now it's he hears, or she hears, or it hears. Probably not it, but it hears. And so by same thing we do with nouns, except now we're functioning with personal endings and not with case endings. Now, in the plural, you have a different set of plural case endings. So we have the same stem, aku, and we're going to add amen. So like amen, that's my joke. You have to get it. In Spanish, it's amen, but in English, it's amen. So I learned that. Okay. So that's we here. And so if we're to change that and add the aku ete, it's you plural here. And obviously we keep following the same path here. And I'm doing this because I want you to see, now I'm going to say aku si. I think I got that right. I may have it because I forget now with that. Actually, because the problem is when we look at it, it's really a noon, and that noon goes away. So that's why I get confused about it. But aku si would be now they here. And so we're talking about, it tells us the person, first, second, or third. It's also going to tell us the voice. All right, that's the next slide. Let me clear this.
Now, you said it's going to agree with the subject.
It will agree with the subject, right? So if the subject is first person, then the verb is going to be first person singular. The verb will be, now typically, there are exceptions, will be first person singular, right? You can't say, Jake, I think that, I'm sure Jake does something wrong, so we'll try to figure that out. Jake is a subject, singular subject, and we say, Jake are feeding his dog. Or Jake are feeding his dog. The verb is are is a plural. You can't align it with a singular subject, so it doesn't make sense. Now the voice in English, the voice talks about how the subject relates to the action. In other words, subject's doing it, subject's receiving it, or some combination. In English, Greek verbs are very much the same. Active, the subject is doing. Passive, subject is receiving. Not a big deal, but we do add a passive in the Greek, right? So unlike English, we have a passive voice where the Greek verb, or a middle voice, not passive, I apologize, where the subject is doing or experiencing with an emphasis on the subject participation and doing the action for their own benefit or self-interest. So I'm doing something that's going to come back on me that I benefit from. Let me give you some examples. In Matthew 27 and verse 5, who are we talking about? Judas Iscariot. He hanged himself. Agape sato. Agape sato. It's hard to pronounce with that gamma there. He hanged himself. So he did it to himself, and the result was he's dead. He did it to himself. right? In Luke 12, verse 37, perezosetai, he will gird himself. Revelation 3, verse 18. There we're talking, I'm pretty sure it's the Laodiceans, where you might clothe yourself in white garments. Pere ballet. It is a middle voice. It's you need to clothe yourself, do it to yourself with the benefit of being right with God. Clothe yourself in white garments. In James 1:21, dexaste, receive for yourself the implanted word. You see, so this middle voice we can express in English, but it's not our normal. We got to use a lot of helping words to make it happen. It's not embedded or structured in our verb structure. That makes sense, you guys? Okay with voice? Voice is not that complex, except we add it in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now let me talk more about tense, where the voice talks about how the subject relates to the action, the state of the verb. Subject either does it, receives it, or some combination of it in the middle. In general, tense involves really two elements: time, just like English, past, present, future, and aspect, being the kind of action. That's really important, the kind of action. It's either like a progressive, ongoing kind of thing, or some summary or big picture kind of thing, or something that's what's referred to as perfected, meaning it's completed, but the results of the completed action kind of continue or have some kind of ongoing results, ongoing maybe in the past or maybe in the future. Jesus died on the cross. Well, that's a completed action. He died on the cross, but it's actually perfected because not only did he die on the cross, but the results have ongoing effects. And that's a perfected action, kind of action. So when you talk about aspect, for me, the easiest way to look at it is pictorial and illustrative. So if we have something that's progressive, also referred to as internal, if I watch a parade, let's look at a parade in all these three cases, okay? Three different aspects in the Greek, right? We said English has perfective and imperfective, or completed and ongoing, but Greek has really three. It has that same perfective and imperfective, but also the aorist, or sort of simple or big picture kind of thing. So let's look at all three. So this progressive or internal or imperfective kind of action, if I was at a parade, I couldn't see the whole parade. I could see what's in front of me, right? I could sort of feel like I'm almost part of it, like I'm just right there. And it's sort of ongoing. I could see it's ongoing. Now, that's an aspect that is progressive or continuous or internal. And normally the tenses associated with that kind of aspect are present tense and imperfect tense, right? So we said, I didn't mention this. In Greek, we're talking about 6 tenses. I'm going to use 2 fingers, 6 tenses. Now, the 6th one, we're really not going to spend much time, because I think, if I remember right, there's only 6 uses of the pluperfect in the New Testament. I think that's correct, 6 for 6. I could be wrong, and it doesn't really matter. It's not many, pluperfect. We'll talk about what a perfect and pluperfect is later. But the other tenses we're really going to focus on is present tense, imperfect tense, future tense, aorist tense, and perfect tense. So a tense, relative to its kind of action associated with that tense, is normally the present and the imperfect tense are going to be those ongoing kind of actions that sort of like, hey, I can see what's happening, but I can't see the big picture. I just see what's in front of me, like in a parade, okay? But the aorist, or excuse me, the big picture, the summary, which is also called the aorist aspect, and also the aorist tense, is I can get a big picture of the parade. Like here we have in the Olympics, the parade people made the number 100. I think it was the 100th anniversary of the Olympics or something like that. I don't remember. I get a big picture, but I can't see any details. Like, I don't really know, are those men or women, or what are they wearing or carrying? I can see the big picture. Or I can go to the arena and I can get really the big sky view and see the whole thing. But I can't necessarily see any specifics about the whole thing. I just see the whole thing. I got the big view, the big picture, the summary view, but no specifics about it, right? So there's generally the aorist tense in Greek and the future tense, which makes sense, function in this sort of big picture kind of view, aorist aspect. And then you have what's called the perfective or state of tense or aspect, excuse me. That is, okay, the parade has gone by, it's done, but what a mess. Look what it left behind. And somebody's got to clean up this mess. So it's a completed kind of action, perfected, but there's ongoing or resulting impact of that completed action. Now, that resulting impact could be in the past. That would be the pluperfect. Not very many of those in the New Testament. Or that resulting impact could be in the future or the present. That is the perfect tense. So we find that these aspects, the kind of action, something that's ongoing, progressive, might be used in the present and the imperfect tense. It can be used elsewhere, but generally speaking, most often. The aorist kind of aspect, the big picture summary kind of view, generally is going to be used in the aorist and the future tense. And this perfective state of kind of tense, meaning something's completed but has some kind of ongoing or impact of the completed action, is almost always perfected tense and pluperfect. There's not many pluperfects. Okay, have I lost you so far? Because I'm working hard to do that.
I'm gonna be honest, the pictures really help.
Yeah, that's why I should have blew this up a little bit so it makes it a little more readable. Yeah, so illustratively, to talk about something that's ongoing, it's hard to kind of realize, but when you look at a parade, you can see something that's ongoing, but I don't get the big picture. I don't know how long this parade is because I'm at the front of it, or I'm at the middle of it. I don't know when it's going to end. I'm like, man, it's getting late. I'm tired. That would be me. I'm like, okay, I saw him. Now let's go. But I never saw the big picture. Or if I want to see the big picture, I can't see the detail. Or I see the results of the picture, but I didn't see the picture itself. I didn't see the parade itself, but I saw the results of it. So we're talking about these kind of aspects, these kind of actions, and the tenses that are generally associated with those kind of actions, right? Present and perfect tense in the Greek is normally something that's continuous, progressive, ongoing. Present is going to be done in the present time. It would be a time related. Not always. Time is different in Greek. And imperfect would normally be related to the past, but it was some ongoing action. Aorist and future are going to give us this big picture, but we're not going to know any specifics about it. That's especially true. You might understand that in the future. Jesus will return. Well, great. I don't know any more about that. Now, Scripture tells us more, so I'm not trying to say that, but really, his second coming, we're given certain information, but the fact that he will return is a fact. But there's a lot of things we don't know in that fact. Okay, now we look at other places in scriptures that tells us more, so don't get me wrong.
Now, Dave, that last one, perfect and pluperfect, that's the parade's done with.
Yeah, it's a completed action.
Okay.
So it's a completed action, right? So you have the ongoing kind of action, right? Progressive, right? I can see the parade. You have sort of the big picture, the summary. That's the aorist and future. And then I have sort of this completed action, but there's some kind of resulting impact because of the action completed, right? That would be the perfective. So we said perfective in English and in Greek is like a completed action. But the kind of action is completed, but there's an ongoing results as because of the completed action. And normally the perfect tense or pluperfect are associated with that kind of aspect, that kind of action. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. Again, you're not going to remember or really grasp all of it until we start breaking it down. But you need to see the big picture. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. And we only have a couple more minutes. Let me see if I can get through a couple more things here. And because you have a class, Samuel, I don't want you to be late for it. Now, another thing about aspect, for example, you look at Mark 8, verse 34. If someone wants to be my disciple, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. 3 verbs. Well, breaking the whole verbs down, just deny and take up. And Mark 8 tells us that there's something we do, but it doesn't. It gives us an event. Okay, I must deny myself. I must take up this cross. But it doesn't tell me anything about that event. But yet, follow me is an ongoing expectation. So you see there's an aspect with follow that's not the same with deny or take up, at least in Mark 8, verse 34. But the parallel passage in Luke 9, I think it is. I don't remember now. Hold on, let me find it because the book brings it out. Luke 9, verse 23. The parallel passage, again, the same word deny, but this time Luke adds something to it that tells us, yes, it's a deny is this event, deny yourself. But what Luke adds is deny yourself daily. So he adds some other words. I could have just changed the verb, but he didn't. He used the same verb in this sort of a summary view. Eris is what it is, a summary view. It's like, hey, deny yourself. Well, okay. What does that really imply? Mean? What does that? Is that ongoing? That daily? One time? Oh, I got to deny myself today. Not worry about tomorrow. We don't. It didn't say that, but Luke clarifies it not by changing the verb, but by adding more helping verbs, which is a way to do it. And by he adds by deny yourself daily. And then the follow me, you see, is something that's ongoing. Its aspect is continuous, that's ongoing, and the verb tense that's used there, forget now, is present, if I remember right. So, all right, so that's kind of an idea about tenses. I'm going to say moods because I'm running out of time. 21. Let's see. Let me mention this about tenses. Well, I got to go moods. I'm going to do moods, okay? Very quickly. A mood, and I know we're going to go back over this when we come back together. A mood portrays the verb's action or state with reference to its actuality or potentiality. In other words, the action is relative to the fact that it is a certain action. It's asserted. Its action is possible or probable, or it's intended, imperative, right? So if we were to take the word luo, lue, and Greek means to loosen, to unbind, and we want to say that it's a statement of fact, and we're going to portray it as some certainty. Then we're going to use the indicative mood. The indicative mood says you are loosing when you loose. But if I change the mood and to the subjunctive mood, then instead of saying it's a fact or a statement or an assertion, it's a probability. You might be loosing. You should be loosing. I have the same word. I just put a different mood to it. So instead of a certainty or assertion, now I'm going to say it's a possibility. It's going to be more of a probability or desire. You might be loosing or you should be loosing. I can also make it where it's a possibility, but not as strong as a probability. Like it's possible, but it's not really, may not be probable. So you may be loosing. That's the optative mood, which actually we're not going to spend much time in at all. And of course, the imperative mood, it's the intended action. It's the, you loose. And so mood really talks about how the action occurs relative to its actuality or potentiality. For example, here in Greek grammar, well, we're not getting into mood so much. And back to tenses. Akuo, I hear. Akue, you hear. Akue, he, she, it hears. Those are personal endings, first, second, third. It's also active voices. I hear, you hear. She, it hears. Luka, amen. Aka, amen. We hear. It's an active voice. Akuete, you hear. It's you, plural, guys, hear. It's active voice. Akuusi, it is the two double O omicron epsilon. They hear. And so what we're going to study over this next few weeks is just the indicative mood. In other words, everything we talk about is going to, from the speaker's perspective, be an assertion of fact or even a question. And we're going to talk about 5 different tenses: the present tense, the imperfect tense, the future tense, the aorist tense, and the perfect tense. Now, here's the neat thing. Once you learn these tenses, you don't have to relearn them. And we're going to see how they modify or work. And then basically the different moods will be the same tenses or actually less than. Indicative has all the tenses. The other tenses or the other moods, subjunctive, imperative, they don't have all the tenses. They have a portion of these tenses, the same 5, but only some of them. And so once you learn these 5, it applies to all the different moods. The mood kind of just tells you more about the action relative to the speaker's actuality or potentiality of the action. Hey, this is a certainty, or this might be possible, or this is really probable, or this is a command. That's what the mood does. And we're going to learn it. I just want to do this much, and I'm going to let you go, brother, because I know you got to go. We're going to learn it in quadrants. We're going to learn this first top left quadrant for primary tenses, the personal endings. We're learning personal endings. We learn case endings for nouns. Now we're going to learn personal endings. The personal endings tell us what kind of voice it is and what kind of person, first, second, or third, person, singular, or plural. So we get number, person, and voice out of the personal ending. So we're going to learn all of these. The left-hand quadrant, top left, the bottom left-hand quadrant, that's what we'll learn first. And then we'll also learn what's called secondary tenses, the top right-hand quadrant and the bottom right-hand quadrant. And again, we're learning in the personal endings, we're learning three things. We're showing the person, the number, and the voice, all in the primary endings. Then it's a matter of tense and mood. And that's the only difference, right? So we got the 5 pieces. 5 pieces in the other side. The 5 pieces, person, number, and voice, all are done in the personal ending. Tense and mood are done in another manner. We'll see that. Okay, I'm going to do the rest later. We're almost actually done with this, but I don't want to make you late. I'm going to finish real quick. I'm sorry, there's only 2 more slides. So basically, we're going to learn in quadrants and sections. So don't get overwhelmed. Like I said, this is an overview. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to take these quadrants, this personal ending, the first top left-hand one, and we're going to just learn it. And we're going to look at the present tense active indicative verb. That's all we're going to do initially. And so we'll look at the tense stem, lu. We'll have a connecting vowel, lu-ah, and then we'll add the primary personal ending that are in this top left-hand quadrant, right? No ending, the sigma ending, the iota ending, the min ending, the te ending, the nc ending. So we'll learn those endings and we'll apply it to the stem, lu, and the connecting vowel, and we'll get our verb. Luo, luace, lue, luamen, luete, luunsi, luusi. And there's things that happen, and we'll get into some of that. And the result would be I am loosing, you are loosing, he, she, it is loosing, we are loosing, you are loosing, and they are loosing. And so from the speaker's perspective, he's stating a fact or an assertion. I am loosing. Oh, you are loosing. Oh, he, she, it is loosing. We are loosing. No, you are plural are loosing or they are loosing. So that's what the tense is doing in the present tense, and the indicative mood is stating what they believe to be an assertion or a fact. It could also be a question, but that's a different thing. So ultimately, what we're going to do is learn all of this in tiny little pieces, and I'm not going to go over it now. And I'm going to point you next week to the back of the book, and we're going to talk about that. So that's the big picture. That's where we're going. This is chapter 15. So in homework, just focus on chapter 15, and the quiz to chapter 15, and then we'll pick up chapter 16 next week. Okay. Any thoughts or questions? That's a lot.
I was going to say, while you were talking about this, it made me think of that word tetelestai. And then, I was looking it up, and it's in the perfect passive indicative third person.
It is finished. Yeah.
It is finished.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So it's a perfect passive. Perfect meaning it's perfect is a completed action with ongoing results, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or some ongoing impact, right?
And it's indicative.
Now, that ongoing impact could be in the present. Again, we're talking from the speaker's perspective, but the implication is it's still ongoing even today. But let's understand, verbs are always from the speaker's perspective, not from our perspective. But yet it has application in our time frame.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, that's great. That's exactly, and that's what the verb does. It is finished. Well, it doesn't just mean he's done. It means he's completed what God intended, what God designed, what God wanted him to do, and the results continue of his completion. The results of that impact all of us. All right, good job, guys. Thank you. I know it's a lot. I knew I would take up this whole time, but this is just a big picture view. We'll start really breaking it down piece by piece in chapter 16, and it will come together. I promise you. So, okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank
Sounds
you,
Thanks,
guys.
Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna hop over to Psalms.
Well, you can just hop ongoing, hop particular.
Yeah, it's
What
it's
voice he's
perfect,
talking
but it's
about.
ongoing.
Yeah. Is it like a continuous hop?
Yeah,
Or
no,
you can hop, one hop, like I'm hopping one time. That's it. I'm done. Yeah.
that's right.
All right. I'm stopping streaming.
See you later.
All right.
We'll see.
Soon.